The famous quote goes, "It has been said," by who exactly I wonder, "that something as small as the flutter of a butterfly's wings can ultimately cause a typhoon halfway around the world." If that's true, did a 19-year-old kid ordering a sandwich from a deli cause the most destructive war in human history up to that time? The answer is, well, no, but that's sort of the wrong question. A better question is, why do some people think that a 19-year-old kid stepping out for a sandwich had something to do with the First World War? Let's zoom out a bit from sandwiches and butterflies to get a handle on what we're dealing with. On June 28, 1914, a Sunday morning, an event occurred right here on this street corner that changed the course of history forever. This corner still looks much the same as it did then. The building that says museum, which was here then, I'll talk about that in a minute. The bridge over there is the Latin Bridge, which has been standing in some form there for centuries. Today, Sarajevo is in the nation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. In 1914, that was a province of the Empire of Austria-Hungary, the heir to whose throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, together with his wife Sophie, was assassinated on this street corner by 19-year-old Bosnian Serb Gavrilo Princip. That story is well known. The assassination sparked a chain reaction of diplomatic and political events, which eventually caused, about 5 weeks later, the outbreak of the First World War, a catastrophe so immense that it led to the collapse of 4 major empires and the total scrambling of the geopolitical order, not to mention the deaths of about 30 million people. I'm working on a very long, in-depth, deep-dive video on the collapse of the world's great monarchies between 1905 and 1920, which necessarily involves World War I. This is not that video. It'll be out soon enough, but while I was working on it, I got sidetracked by a minor but interesting issue, specifically the sandwich. The sandwich story goes like this. Princip was a member of an informal group of associates, most of them young, all Bosnian Serbs, who had banded together and were coordinated by Danilo Ilic to whack the Archduke as a blow for Bosnian nationalism. In fact, a little less than an hour or so before Princip struck, a couple of other members of the plot on a different street corner, this one, in fact, had tried to assassinate Ferdinand by throwing a bomb at his car. The bomb did explode, but did not injure the Archduke or his wife, who then proceeded to a reception at Sarajevo City Hall, and then decided to change their plans to visit the hospital where people injured in the bomb attack were being treated. That meant their motorcade would double back along its original route. All of that is true, documented historical facts repeated in basically every account of the assassination. Princip, one of the other members of the murder plot, had been stationed on this corner. The building today marked as museum was in 1914 the site of a business called Schiller's Delicatessen. Supposedly, now here's where it gets murky, Princip, thinking the motorcade was over and his group's opportunity for assassination had passed, went to Schiller's to order a sandwich for lunch. After he got it, he was surprised to see the Archduke's motorcade pass once again in front of the corner. He still had his pistol, this very one, in fact, and amazed by his good luck, he forgot about his lunch, ran out of the deli, stepped off the curb, walked up, pointed the gun, and blew Franz and Sophie away with 2 shots. Sophie died in the car, the Archduke a few minutes later. Cue World War I, and you know the rest. It's a great story, but it did not happen. At least the bit with the sandwich didn't happen. Furthermore, the detail of the sandwich did not even get into the assassination story until this century, the 21st, relatively recently. If it's not true, first of all, how do we know it's not true? How did it get into the story? And why do people still believe it? That's the subject of this video. Hi, I'm Sean Munger, historian, and this video is a little extra for my viewers, a little morsel, a sandwich, dare I say, while you're waiting for my next long deep dive video, which is coming. If you're not a subscriber, or if this is your first voyage with me, check out the videos on my long-form deep dive playlist. There is some fun and interesting stuff there. The deep dive video, coming soon, on the fall of the great monarchies, begins with the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, but that's only a small part of it. And while I was writing the portion on the assassination, something triggered in my mind. Now I can't recall where or when I first heard the story, but I know that I heard or read about it somewhere, probably online. The sandwich is not mentioned in one of my main sources for the Fall of Monarchies video, a book called The Fall of the Dynasties by Edmund Taylor, one of my all-time favorite history books. Though a little dated, it was published in 1963. The sandwich is also not mentioned in accounts of the assassination in my other favorite books about the outbreak of World War I, Dreadnought by Robert K. Massey, or The Guns of August by Barbara Tuchman. Admittedly, Tuchman doesn't recount the details of the assassination itself, she just mentions it briefly. Nor is the sandwich mentioned in Clive Ponting's 13 Days, Diplomacy and Disaster, published in 2002, which does discuss the assassination in detail, but not that detail. Where, then, did I hear the sandwich story? As I said, I honestly don't remember, but it turns out it's all over the internet and has been for a long time. Cracked.com, not exactly the font of A+ historical scholarship, but very popular in the late aughts, called Princip's sandwich one of the 6 random coincidences that made the modern world. That article was published in 2009. Around the same time, August 2008, Jeffrey Kluger, science editor for Time magazine, wrote an article for the Los Angeles Times in which he led with the sandwich story, claiming that whoever made it had a lot to answer for, clearly linking the sandwich to the catastrophe of World War I. No one less than a pillar of broadcasting, veteran BBC reporter John Simpson, repeated the sandwich claim in his 2010 book, ironically titled Unreliable Sources, about how reporters misreported some of the 20th century's greatest events. Notably, in his bit on the assassination, he is not quoting or analyzing specific news sources. He just throws the sandwich thing in as a detail. Though a lot of this dates from a number of years ago, nothing ever really dies on the internet. I found a Medium article from 2018 that discusses the sandwich claim prominently as if it's true. One of my favorite fellow history YouTubers, Mr. Betts, included the sandwich claim in his video from 2019 on the causes of World War I, though he was careful enough to preface it with the word allegedly. And Mr. Betts is awesome, so he gets a pass. I even found a meme on Reddit posted July 2023 that references the sandwich claim and somehow links it to the Iraq War of 2003. Okay, whatever. This meme also references the butterfly effect. So it's clear that the Princip ordering a sandwich thing has a lot of reach into popular imagination. I already told you that the sandwich story is not true. But how do we know it's not true? I mean, we can forgive Cracked.com, a notorious clickbait site, and some recent meme makers on Reddit can similarly be dismissed. But if the science editor of Time and a BBC journalist who witnessed the Tiananmen Square massacre and got shot at in Iraq fell for it, is there something to it? Where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Let me be clear. I am not faulting anybody for believing this uniquely seductive detail. In fact, we'll see later on how it gained the cloak of legitimacy. It has to do with a single source that repeated it. I can't blame Jeffrey Kluger and John Simpson for falling for it. The Princip story is kind of a stealthy fake, flying under the radar. You can't really blame anybody for believing it. In the description, I've linked to an article from Smithsonian Magazine by Mike Dash, who investigated the rumor of Princip's sandwich and where it came from. It's from 2011, 12 years ago. But just as I gave you some more recent examples of the sandwich myth being repeated as if it's true, it's clear that this debunking needs to keep getting rehashed periodically. In my professional opinion, Dash makes an excellent case for why we should conclude that the sandwich rumor is not true. But before we get into the reasons why we can be pretty sure that World War I did not start with a sandwich, let's take a brief look at what actually happened. In 1914, Austria-Hungary had a huge problem with ethnic minorities within its borders, of which there were dizzyingly many, wanting independent homelands of their own, or at least wanting to get out from under the ethnically German Austrians and the Hungarians who called most of the shots in the empire. Slavs, again of which there were many kinds, dreamed of a majority Slavic homeland, Yugoslavia it would be called, outside the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Bosnia and Herzegovina, a Slav-populated area that had been part of the crumbling Ottoman Empire, had only recently been annexed by Austria-Hungary in 1908, only a couple of years before the assassination. Serbia was another country, that one fully independent, at least for the time being, that had been carved up out of the former European provinces of the Ottomans. Austria-Hungary, ruled by the Habsburg family, generally blamed Serbia and Serbians for stirring up trouble against them in provinces like Bosnia and Herzegovina. Now, just for clarity, Bosnia and Herzegovina, that's one single province, despite its name that makes it sound like two. Just as today, Bosnia and Herzegovina is one single country. Austria-Hungary's emperor, Franz Joseph, had been on the throne since 1848 and was getting pretty long in the tooth. Since his son, Crown Prince Rudolf, unalived himself in 1889 when the family wouldn't let him divorce his wife and marry his 17-year-old girlfriend, the heir apparent to the throne was Franz Ferdinand, the emperor's nephew. He was not quite as much of a stick in the mud as his uncle, and it was expected that if and when he took over, there would be changes within the empire, which would probably see those Slavic provinces get some more, though not all, of the autonomy that they wanted. This was what these Bosnian assassins, Princip and friends, wanted to prevent. The harsher and more iron-fisted the Austrian rule, the more motivated Slavs within Austria-Hungary would be, so they thought, to want to overthrow it. They also thought that an act of terrorism like this would throw Austria-Hungary into chaos. Though Princip and his gang, which was really directed by Danilo Ilic, were not members of it, there was a cabal of Serbian army officers and intelligence agents called the Black Hand that was also trying to stir up trouble against Austria. The ins and outs of the plot, which was hatched in Belgrade, the capital of Serbia, aren't important for our purposes. Suffice it to say, Ilic got them weapons and suicide pills, helped smuggle members of the gang who lived in Serbia into Bosnia and Herzegovina, and once they knew the motorcade route of the Archduke, which was planned in advance, he positioned members of the gang on two street corners along the route. The main part of the motorcade was one street, which was then known as Apel Quay, which runs along the Miljaska River. The motorcade started at the railway station and then proceeded to City Hall for a reception. After the reception, the plan was to go into the city center where the Archduke would visit a museum. However, as I said earlier, after the bomb, Ferdinand and Sophie made the decision to scrub that part of their itinerary and instead go to Sarajevo Hospital. That was back the direction that they'd originally come, which meant that they would essentially retrace part of their route on the Apel Quay. The thing was, nobody told the drivers of the cars. After leaving City Hall, the cars proceeded back down Apel Quay. Franz and Sophie were in car number 3. The first two cars were sticking to the old route, which would have necessitated them turning right at what was then called Franz Joseph Street, heading for the museum. The first two cars did turn right. When the driver of the third car, the one that the Archduke was in, started to follow him, the military governor, who was riding in that car, told the driver, "No, not that way, you fool, keep straight on." So, to change course, the driver had to stop, shift the car into reverse, and then head back down Apel Quay. This was right at the intersection of that street and Franz Joseph Street, right next to the Latin Bridge. This is also where Schiller's Delicatessen was. But this was also the corner on which Ilic had stationed Princip, with orders to strike in case the bomb attack further up the street failed. As we know, that attack had failed. The bomb, thrown by Nedeljko Kabranović, bounced off the Archduke's car, fell under one of the other cars, and exploded there. Princip heard the explosion, and he heard from the gathered crowd that it hadn't hurt the Archduke or his wife. So for a while, he did think that the assassination attempt was over, and he did move away from his assigned post at the corner of Franz Joseph Street and Apel Quay. but he apparently did not go into Schiller's delicatessen. Here are Princip's exact words, his own account of what happened, spoken at his trial in October 1914. Quote, "I thought it was over, and I saw that they had Kabranovich. I thought I would kill him so that no one would know anything further, and then kill myself too. I abandoned the idea because I saw that the automobiles passed by. Up to then I had not seen the Archduke. I went to the Latin Bridge, and then I heard that the assassination had not succeeded. Then I took thought as to where to stand, because I knew where he would pass from having read it in the Bosnian Post. Then I saw that a lady was sitting with him, but because they passed so fast I did not know whether she was sitting. Then I stood, and one Pusar came up to me and talked with me and said, 'Do you see how dumb they are?' I was silent. But then the automobile came, and I took out the revolver, and I shot at Ferdinand twice from the distance of 4 or 5 paces." End quote. According to Mike Dash, who researched further the trial records, the man called Pusar or Pusara, who had talked to Princip, was questioned at the trial, and his account matches up exactly with what Princip said happened. There was also another witness, someone called Dernich, who apparently did come out of Schiller's delicatessen only to see Princip blazing away at the Archduke and Sophie. Nowhere in any of these testimonies is there mention of Princip going into Schiller's deli, much less ordering a sandwich. In fact, Princip said at his trial that he went back to the place at the Latin Bridge, the place he was originally standing, because he knew that the motorcade would pass by that corner again, and that if he waited, he would be in place to execute the Archduke, a second chance to succeed where the other plotters had failed. None of the witnesses contradicted Princip on this point. Why would they? What this means is this was not a coincidence. We know the motorcade route was supposed to pass that corner. We know that Princip was there earlier with the intent to kill the Archduke and his weapon ready to go. The fact that Schiller's delicatessen there is not the reason that Princip was on that corner, which is what the sandwich story, especially as repeated by Kluger and John Simpson, suggests. In fact, eager as Princip was to carry out the assassination, it doesn't make sense that he would take 5 at that precise moment to go eat. If the motorcade hadn't yet passed by him that second time, why would he risk missing it by going into the deli to eat? Mike Dash from the Smithsonian gives us 2 more reasons to doubt the sandwich story. The first is his doubt that sandwiches would even have been a thing in Bosnian delicatessens in 1914. A Bosnian or Serb probably would have ordered something called burek, a kind of pastry. Sandwiches, as ubiquitous as they are today, were more of an Anglo-American thing at the beginning of the 20th century. Of course, that changed later. The second reason is timing. While the exact time of events of the assassination does vary by source, all the sources I consulted had slightly different times, I couldn't find any one of them that claimed that the Archduke was killed later than 11:30 a.m. It may have been as early as 10:30 a.m. A little early for lunch, don't you think? Now, granted, these 2 factors don't add up to a slam dunk, but look at everything else we've got here. The primary sources, Princip's own statements, and others at the trial, don't mention him going into the deli, much less getting a sandwich. Also, the logical reasoning doesn't support it. Princip going into the deli would have taken him away from the street corner, the place that he most wanted to be, and he had an expectation that the motorcade would pass by. And given that sandwiches don't seem to have been a thing in Bosnia at the time, and it was too early for lunchtime anyway, there's no reliable evidence that the sandwich story is true, and convincing reasons for believing that it's not. I believe it is a historian's job to make judgment calls based on the evidence about what did or did not happen in the past. Based on what I know, my conclusion is that the Princip sandwich story did not happen. So how did the sandwich get into the story in the first place? There's a telltale clue. Princip's sandwich is everywhere on the internet, but nowhere in the books, at least not until the internet age. We can almost date the sandwich rumor to sometime in the 2000s because there's no mention of it before then. Indeed, looking at the various items that repeat it, Mike Dash argues that the origin of the sandwich claim is not a work of history at all, but a novel called The 12 Fingers by Joe Suarez, published in 2001. In the novel, a fictional character named Dmitri, who has an extra finger on each hand, how charming is that, gets mixed up in the Sarajevo assassination plot. And on page 31, sure enough, he meets Princip coming out of the delicatessen, eating a sandwich, thinking that the chance to kill the Archduke is over. In the book, Dmitri and Princip wind up on the corner together, each pointing their guns at Franz, but Dmitri F's it up, and it's Princip's shots that kill him. You can read The 12 Fingers for yourself on archive.org with a free subscription. I've put the link to the book in the description. There it is in black and white, the origin of the myth on page 31. Now, I'm not in any way criticizing Suarez, the author of The 12 Fingers, for writing this. Joe Suarez, who died in 2022, was a novelist, not a historian. Novelists and storytellers have carte blanche to embellish or reinterpret historical events however they like, as long as they don't pass it off as fact, which to my knowledge he never did. How the sandwich story got the ring of truth appears to be accidental. From The 12 Fingers, the sandwich story somehow jumped into a BBC TV documentary called Days That Shook the World, which was made in 2003. That's where it acquired its legitimacy and began to be reproduced, mostly on the internet, as truth. It reached the LA Times in 2008, adding more gravitas to the claim, and then Cracked.com in 2009, thus injecting it into popular culture. After that, the sandwich story's final trajectory as a meme was pretty much inevitable. Thus, the mistake was made by the writers and fact-checkers of the BBC Days That Shook the World program, which would have and did become a reputable source for the claim. Historians make mistakes all the time. I make mistakes all the time. It could happen to anyone. Again, I'm not attacking the BBC or whoever made that program, or especially anyone who believed the sandwich story after they made that error. But at least now we understand where the story came from. Fortunately, there is pushback on the sandwich claim. If you search online for Gavrilo Princip, if you can spell it, and the word sandwich, you will find on Google significant hits, including Mike Dash's article debunking it on the first page of results. So maybe we historians are making some progress against misinformation, for a change. It's worth asking the question, does it matter? I mean, what's the harm in believing that Princip ducked into a deli for a sandwich before starting World War I? Aside from the absolutist answer, it's not what happened, and now that we know it's not what happened, we should stop conflating it with the truth, I think, yes, there is some harm that can come from acceptance of this claim as part of the story of how World War I happened. Look again at the Cracked.com formulation. 6 random coincidences that created the modern world. That's an inference that does violence, I think, to the historical reality of the event. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand was not a random coincidence. Far, far from it. It was absolutely deliberate. It was planned. There were 6 people in on the plot, so if one or more failed to nuke the Archduke, the odds were good that another one of them would succeed. They had guns and bombs and cyanide pills. Princip stood his ground on exactly the spot that he was assigned, because he knew that the motorcade was coming around again. It was not a random coincidence. The myth of the sandwich takes the agency out of everyone that had something to do with the causes of World War I. Not just Princip, who stepped off the curb to fire his gun at the Archduke, but Kaiser Wilhelm and the Tsar of Russia, and General von Moltke, and the guy who came up with the Schlieffen Plan, I think his name was Schlieffen, and everyone else whose decisions and omissions, good or bad, led to this ghastly catastrophe. The moment that you claim that it hinged on one guy stepping into a deli for a sandwich, you take all of that away. You reduce one of the most important events in modern history to a triviality. There genuinely are coincidences in history. The spark that ignited in a wooden chimney in 1666 and burned down the city of London, that was random. Ted Kennedy missing a turn in his car on Chappaquiddick Island in 1969. That was random. In my last video, the Manson case, Stephen Parent not leaving William Garretson's house 1 or 2 minutes earlier than he did, thus being there when the Manson killers arrived, that was random. World War I and the great changes that it brought, including the fall of the monarchies, was not like that. It wasn't random. And as fun as it sounds on the surface, it wasn't about a sandwich. Thanks so much for watching. As I said at the beginning, this is a small spin-off video of a much larger project, my upcoming deep dive into the fall of the 5 great monarchies: China, Austria-Hungary, Russia, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire during the World War I era. So look out for that, it's coming soon. Check out my other videos if you haven't already: Manson, the Persian Gulf War, American political history, the Titanic, and others. So if you like this video, hit the thumbs up, subscribe, all that stuff that you normally do for a video you like, and thank you for joining me, as always, on another journey into the past.